businessman came home and found his daughter lying on the floor. What was on her body left him paralyzed. Richard Sullivan arrived home after another exhausting day of meetings. His construction company was going through a financial crisis, and supplier demands kept piling up. At 52, he felt the weight of all his responsibilities on his shoulders. When he opened the living room door, his life changed forever. Emily, his 28-year-old daughter, was lying on the floor, unconscious. But it wasn't just seeing her passed out that made him freeze. The sleeves of her blouse had ridden up, revealing old scars on her arms, marks identical to the ones he himself had carried since childhood. "Emily!" Richard shouted, rushing to her and kneeling by her side. The young woman slowly opened her eyes, still dazed. When she realized her scars were exposed, she quickly pulled her sleeves down, her face red with shame. "Dad, I'm sorry, I slipped and hit my head on the coffee table," she murmured, trying to sit up. Richard helped her, but his eyes remained fixed on the spot where he'd seen the marks. There were 3 parallel lines on her right forearm and a star-shaped scar on her left wrist, exactly like his. "Emily, where did you get these scars?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What scars, Dad?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, avoiding his gaze. Richard rolled up his own sleeves, showing the identical marks on his arms. The silence that followed was deafening. "Then explain this," he said, pointing to his own scars. Emily turned pale. For 28 years, she had hidden those marks, always wearing long sleeves or bracelets to cover them. She never imagined her father had the same ones. I've always had these marks, Dad, for as long as I can remember," she whispered. Richard sank heavily onto the couch, running his hands through his graying hair. For years he had carried the pain of believing Emily wasn't his biological daughter. His late wife, Margaret, had confessed on her deathbed that she'd had a relationship before their marriage, leaving him uncertain about paternity. But he'd never done a DNA test because he loved Emily unconditionally, no matter her origins. "Dad, are you okay? You look really pale," Emily said, worried. "How did you get these scars, Emily? I need you to be honest with me." The young woman took a deep breath. She knew the time had come to share the truth she'd kept hidden for so long. "I always knew they were special, Dad. Mum told me I was born with them, that it was rare, but she never wanted to talk about it. Whenever I asked, she'd cry and change the subject." Richard felt as if the ground were disappearing beneath him. His own scars were the result of a terrible accident he'd witnessed when he was just 5 years old. A collapse at an amusement park in Rochester had left several children injured, including himself. "Emily, do you know anything about an amusement park? Any accident when you were little?" She shook her head, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't telling the whole truth. "No, Dad. Why are you asking that?" Before Richard could answer, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Shirley, his personal secretary of over 30 years, a 68-year-old woman who knew all the Sullivan family's secrets. "Good evening, Mr. Richard. I'm sorry to disturb you at home, but I need to speak with you urgently," she said, looking nervous. "Of course, Mrs. Shirley. Come in," Richard replied, still stunned by the discovery of the scars. Shirley stepped inside and greeted Emily warmly. She'd known the young woman since she was a baby and treated her like a granddaughter. But today, there was something different in her expression. "Emily, sweetheart, would you give us a moment? I need to speak with your father about something private," the secretary requested. "Of course, Mrs. Shirley. I'll go to my room," said Emily, still feeling weak. When they were alone, Shirley sat in the armchair across from Richard, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Richard, I couldn't keep this secret any longer. All these years, I've carried a weight in my heart that's been eating me alive." Richard stared at her, sensing his life was about to change once again. "What are you talking about, Shirley?" "It's about Emily, sir. About the truth Mrs. Margaret asked me never to reveal." Shirley's words echoed through the room like thunder. Richard felt his heart race. "What truth?" Shirley took a deep breath before continuing. "Emily isn't your or Mrs. Margaret's biological daughter. She was switched at birth when she was a baby." Richard was speechless. It felt like he was living a nightmare. "Switched? That's impossible, Shirley. Why did Margaret never tell me?" Because she found out much later when Emily was already 8, and she decided to stay silent to protect the girl and the family you'd built together. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. But the scars. How could she have the same scars as me? Richard asked, confused. Shirley lowered her head, as if carrying the weight of the world. That's the hardest part to explain, Mr. Richard. Emily and you were in the same place when the accident happened. What accident? The collapse at Joy Park in Rochester. You were little, and there with your parents. Emily, who was only 3 at the time, was with the nurse who cared for her at the orphanage. Richard's legs felt weak. Joy Park had been the site of the worst accident of his childhood. A ride had collapsed, leaving many children injured. He vaguely remembered helping a little girl crying in the wreckage. Are you telling me that you saved Emily that day, without knowing who she was, and years later, she became your daughter through a mix-up at the hospital? Silence filled the room. Richard tried to process everything, but it seemed impossible that any of it was real. How did Margaret find out about the switch? By chance, sir. When Emily was 8, Mrs. Margaret was organizing the family documents and noticed an inconsistency in the birth certificate. She investigated and discovered there had been an accidental baby swap at the same hospital where Emily was born. Richard stood and paced the room, trying to gather his thoughts. And where is our real biological daughter? Shirley hesitated before answering. Margaret managed to locate her. Her name is Lauren, and she was raised by a humble family in upstate New York. But when Margaret tried to reach out, the family refused any contact. Why? They were afraid of losing the daughter they'd raised with so much love. And honestly, Mrs. Margaret was also afraid of destroying the family you'd built with Emily. Richard sat back down, burying his face in his hands. It felt like his whole life had been a lie. Why are you telling me this now, Shirley? Because Emily is suffering, sir. She's always sensed something was different about her, and today, when I saw her scars exposed, I realized I couldn't keep this secret any longer. Does she know she's adopted? She suspects. Margaret was very loving with her, but sometimes treated her differently, as if trying to make up for something. Richard thought back to all the times he had noticed a certain melancholy in Margaret's eyes when she looked at Emily. Now, it all made sense. Shirley, you said Emily was at the orphanage when the accident happened. How did she end up there? The secretary took a deep breath. That's another part of the story I've never told anyone. Emily wasn't really an orphan. What do you mean? She was abandoned by a nurse from the very hospital where the switch happened, a woman named Irene Parker who had worked in the maternity ward for many years. Richard felt his blood run cold. Abandoned? Why? From what Mrs. Margaret discovered, Irene had a sister who died in childbirth, leaving Emily behind. Since Irene couldn't raise the girl herself, she placed her in the orphanage, but always stayed close, visiting and caring for her. Then why did she switch the babies at the hospital? Shirley paused, as if gathering courage to continue. Because she wanted to give her niece a better life. When she saw you, a young couple with good financial means, she made the decision to switch the babies. Richard fell silent for a long moment, trying to absorb all the information. Where is this nurse now? Irene is still alive, sir. She's 78 and lives in a retirement home right here in New York City, but she's very ill. Shirley, why didn't you tell me this before? Why keep this secret for so long? The secretary began to cry. Because Mrs. Margaret made me promise I'd only reveal it if it was absolutely necessary. She said you were happy as you were, and that it wasn't worth destroying the family over a piece of paper. Richard stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, life went on as usual, but inside that house, everything had changed forever. So now what? What do I do with this information? You need to talk to Emily, Mr. Richard. She deserves to know the truth. Just then, Emily appeared at the top of the stairs. She had overheard part of the conversation and quietly come down. Dad, is what I heard true? She asked, tears in her eyes. Richard and Shirley turned, startled. Emily had heard everything. Emily? Is it true I was switched at the hospital? That you're not my biological parents?" Richard stepped toward her, but Emily backed away. "Emily, you're my daughter, no matter what. That will never change." "But I'm not really your daughter," she said, breaking into sobs. "Yes, you are. Biology doesn't define family, Emily." Shirley moved closer too. "Sweetheart, your mother loved you more than anything in this world. That's why she decided never to tell. She didn't want you to feel different or rejected." Emily sat on the stair step, burying her face in her hands. "Now I understand why I always felt different, why I always sensed something didn't fit." Richard sat beside her and hugged her. "You were never different to me, Emily. From the first day I held you in my arms, I knew you were my daughter. But I have a biological family out there somewhere, and you have a real daughter who was raised by other people." "You are our real daughter," Richard said firmly. Shirley stepped closer. "Emily, there's something you need to know about your scars." The young woman lifted her tear-streaked face. "What?" "Your father was the one who saved you the day of the accident at the park. He was only 5 years old, but he helped you when you were hurt in the wreckage." Emily looked at Richard in disbelief. "Is that true?" Richard nodded, his own tears starting to fall. "I vaguely remember a little girl crying. I tried to help her, but then the adults came and separated us. So fate had already connected us long before the hospital switch," Emily murmured. "It seems so," said Richard, holding her tighter in his arms. Shirley wiped her own tears. "I kept some letters Mrs. Margaret wrote before she passed. She asked me to give them to you only if this conversation ever happened." Richard and Emily looked at her, waiting. "I'll go get them from home and bring them tomorrow." Mrs. Margaret explained everything much better than I ever could. After Shirley left, father and daughter sat on the stairs, hugging in silence. It was too much to process in one night. "Dad, do you want to meet your biological daughter?" asked Emily, breaking the silence. Richard thought for a moment. "I'm curious, of course, but you're my priority. How do you feel about all this?" "I don't know, Dad. It's like my whole life has been a lie." "Your life isn't a lie, Emily. The love we've felt for you has always been real. The moments we've shared have always been real. But I stole someone else's place. Your real daughter is out there somewhere, not knowing she has a family here." Richard cupped Emily's face in his hands. "You didn't steal anything. You were a child, and the nurse made that decision because she wanted to give you a better life. Still, I feel guilty. Then let's figure this out together. We'll uncover the whole truth and decide what to do." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Shirley arrived early with a small cardboard box. Inside were 5 handwritten letters from Margaret, carefully preserved all these years. "Mrs. Margaret told me to give these letters in the right order," explained Shirley, handing the first one to Richard. The letter was dated 3 years before Margaret's passing. Richard opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this letter, it means our Emily has finally discovered the truth about her origins. I chose to keep this secret because I believed it was best for our family. When I learned about the hospital mix-up, my first instinct was to tell you everything. But then I realized it might destroy the pure love between you and Emily. She has always been your daughter, Richard, from the very moment you first saw her. I know about your doubts regarding paternity because of my past, but now you know those doubts were never justified. Emily came to us in a different way, but no less special. The scars you both carry are proof that fate meant for you to be father and daughter. You saved her when she was a child, and she saved you from an empty life when she came into our family. Please don't judge Nurse Irene too harshly. She acted out of love for her niece, just as I acted out of love for our family when I decided to keep this secret. With all my love, Margaret." Richard finished reading with tear-filled eyes. Emily, sitting beside him, was also crying. "Daddy, she really loved us so much." "Yes, she did, sweetheart." Shirley handed over the second letter, this one addressed specifically to Emily. "My dearest Emily, you've always been the light of my life. When I found out you weren't born from me, At first I felt like I'd lost a part of myself. But then I realized a mother's love doesn't come from blood. It comes from the heart. Every night I spent caring for you when you were sick, every smile you gave me in the morning, every "I love you, Mommy," you whispered before bed, all of it was real and true. I know you've always felt different, and that broke my heart. I wanted to protect you from that pain, but maybe I ended up causing a different kind of pain instead. Your scars are special, my darling. They connect you to your father in a way that goes beyond biology. You are survivors together, warriors who found each other amid pain and built a family based on love. Don't feel guilty for being raised by us. You didn't choose this, but we chose you every single day from the very first moment. Your mother forever, Margaret. Emily sobbed as she read. Shirley handed her a tissue and waited for her to calm down before presenting the third letter. This one is about the nurse Irene, Shirley said. Richard opened the letter and began reading aloud. Richard and Emily, I've managed to trace the full story of the nurse Irene Parker. She lost her sister, Sophie, during Emily's birth. Sophie was unmarried and had spent her entire pregnancy hiding it from everyone, afraid of her conservative family's reaction. When Sophie passed away, Irene took responsibility for Emily, but she was working 3 jobs to support herself and couldn't afford to raise a child. That's why she placed her in the orphanage, but she never completely abandoned her. Irene visited Emily every weekend at the orphanage. She took her on outings, bought her clothes and toys, and even accompanied her on the day of the accident at the park. When the opportunity for the hospital switch arose, Irene saw a chance to give Emily the life she had always wanted for her niece, a stable family with love and the means to raise her properly. Irene never married or had children of her own. Emily was always the daughter she could never officially have. I know this information may be hard to process, but I thought it was important for you to know that Emily was always deeply loved, even before she came to us. Richard stopped reading and looked at Emily. How do you feel knowing this? Confused, she replied. Relieved to know I wasn't abandoned for lack of love, but also sad that this woman had to give me up. Shirley spoke up. Mrs. Irene didn't give you up, dear. She made a sacrifice because she loved you. And where is she now? Emily asked. At St. Mary's retirement home, in the Upper East Side. As I mentioned yesterday, she's quite frail. Richard looked at Emily. Would you like to meet her? Emily hesitated. I think so, but I'm scared. We can go together, if you'd like. Before that, Shirley interrupted, there are 2 more letters. One about your biological daughter, and another with instructions on what Mrs. Margaret believed should be done. Richard picked up the 4th letter. About our biological daughter, Lauren. I managed to locate the family who raised her. The adoptive parents are John and Rose Wilson. They live in a small town called Riverdale in upstate New York. John works as a mechanic, and Rose is an elementary school teacher. I tried reaching out a few times, but they were always hesitant. I found out that Lauren graduated in education and works at the school where her adoptive mother teaches. She married a local man 2 years ago and is now expecting her first child. From what I observed from a distance, yes, I went there once, she seems happy and well cared for. She has a family who loves her and an established life. I don't know if it would be fair to disrupt her life because of our desire to meet her. Maybe it's best to let her find out on her own, if that's what she wants. I leave this decision to you. Emily was thoughtful. She's pregnant. She's going to be a mother. Yes, Richard replied. And that makes everything more complicated. Dad, do you miss her? The daughter you never knew? Richard sighed. I'm curious, but I don't miss her because my daughter is right here beside me. Shirley handed over the last letter. This is the one Mrs. Margaret considered most important. Richard opened it and read, My final instructions. If you've made it this far, you now know the whole truth. Now you must decide what to do with this information. My suggestion is that you visit Mrs. Irene first. She deserves to meet the wonderful woman Emily has become, and Emily deserves to hear the full story from Irene. As for Lauren, I leave the decision entirely up to you. If you choose to make contact, do so gently and without pressure. If she doesn't want to meet us, we must respect that. But most importantly, Don't let these revelations destroy the love we've built as a family. Emily, you are our daughter in our hearts. Richard, you are the most devoted father any child could wish for. Family isn't defined by DNA, but by the bonds we choose to strengthen every day. If you decide to seek more answers, do it together. If you decide to leave the past behind and move forward, do that together too. What matters is that you make these choices with love, not fear. With all my eternal love, Margaret. P.S. Shirley, thank you for keeping these secrets and for caring for our family even after I was gone. You were always more than just a secretary to us. Shirley was openly crying now. Mrs. Margaret was a very wise woman, she said. Richard folded the letter carefully. So now, Emily, what do you want to do? I want to meet Mrs. Irene, she answered without hesitation. I need to hear the whole story from her directly. What about Lauren? Emily thought for a moment. I think we should try an initial contact, something very subtle. If she shows interest, we'll talk. If she doesn't, we respect her decision. Richard nodded. Shirley, could you come with us to visit Mrs. Irene? Of course, Mr. Richard, but there's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Richard and Emily looked at her, waiting. I know Mrs. Irene personally. What do you mean? Richard asked. Shirley lowered her head, ashamed. Because she's my sister. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard and Emily stared at Shirley as if she were a stranger. You're the sister of the nurse who made the switch? Richard asked, incredulous. Yes, sir. Irene is my older sister. Shirley, why did you never tell us this? Because I was part of the switch too, she confessed, breaking into tears. It was my idea to suggest your family to Irene. Richard stood abruptly. You were involved? How? I had been working for you for 2 years when Emily was born. I knew Mrs. Margaret had been trying to conceive for a long time and that you both desperately wanted a child. When Irene told me about Emily and said she wanted to find a good family for her, I suggested you. Emily was also shocked. Mrs. Shirley, did you plan all this? I didn't plan it, dear. I just facilitated it. Irene had already decided to make the switch. I only suggested a specific family instead of leaving it to chance. Richard began pacing the room, visibly agitated. Shirley, you lied to me for 30 years. How can I trust you now? Mr. Richard, I never lied about anything related to work or our lives. I kept only this secret because I promised my sister and Mrs. Margaret. But you knew from the beginning that Emily wasn't our biological daughter, Richard said, pointing at her. I knew, but I also saw the immediate love that grew between you. I saw how Mrs. Margaret devoted herself to Emily and how you became a wonderful father. I've never regretted the suggestion I made. Emily, who had stayed quiet during the whole argument, finally spoke up. Dad, please calm down. How can I calm down, Emily? All these years our secretary knew everything and never said a word. And if she had told you from the beginning, would you still have loved me the same way? Emily asked. Her question made Richard stop pacing. He looked at her, realizing the weight of her words. Of course I would. Then what's the difference? Mrs. Shirley and Mrs. Irene made sure I reached out to you. I don't see that as a bad thing. Richard sighed and sat back down. Shirley, I need some time to process all this. Do you understand? I understand perfectly, Mr. Richard. If you'd prefer, I can step away for a while. No, Emily said quickly. Mrs. Shirley, you've been part of our family for 30 years. We don't want you to leave. We just need time to adjust to all these revelations. Richard looked at Emily and saw the wisdom in her eyes. Even amid all the confusion, she could see things clearly. Shirley, I won't lie and say I'm not upset that you kept this from me. But Emily is right. Your family, Shirley cried with relief. Thank you. You have no idea how much I've suffered all these years keeping this secret. Now tell me something, Richard said. Does your sister Irene know you work for us? She does, and it pains her every day. She's always wanted to meet Emily but was afraid of causing trouble for the family. Is that why she's in the retirement home? Does she have no family to care for her? Emily asked. She has me, dear, but she chose to stay there because she said she didn't deserve my care after what she did. That's nonsense, Emily said. She did nothing wrong. She gave me a family." Richard looked at Emily with pride. Even after learning her whole life had been built on a lie, she could still see the good in things. "Shirley, when can we visit your sister?" "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Richard. But I should warn you, she's very frail. She has heart problems and sometimes gets confused." "Can we go this afternoon?" Emily asked. "If you're prepared, I can call the home and check if it's a good time." Richard looked at Emily. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" "I am, Dad. The longer I wait, the more nervous I'll get." Shirley called St. Mary's retirement home and confirmed Irene was having a good day, alert and open to visitors. At 3 in the afternoon, Richard, Emily and Shirley arrived at the retirement home. It was a simple but well-kept place with lovely gardens and attentive staff. "Mrs. Irene is in the sitting room," the nurse in charge informed them. She was very excited when she heard her sister was coming with special guests. Shirley led them down a hallway to a spacious room where several elderly residents chatted or watched TV. In the corner, seated in an armchair by the window, was a white-haired woman with strikingly expressive blue eyes. When Irene saw them approaching, her face lit up. But when her gaze settled on Emily, she pressed her hands to her chest and began to cry. "Oh, my heavens," she murmured. "It's you, it's really you." Emily walked to the armchair and knelt beside Irene. "Hello, Mrs. Irene. I'm Emily." Irene reached out with trembling hands and touched Emily's face. "You look just like your birth mother at your age. The same mouth, the same eyes. You remember my birth mother." "I remember everything about Sophie," Irene said, tears streaming down her face. "She was my baby sister, the most beautiful of us all." Richard stepped closer. "Mrs. Irene, I'm Richard, Emily's adoptive father." Irene looked at him and smiled through her tears. "I know who you are. Shirley told me about you every day for all these years." "Why did you switch us at the hospital?" Emily asked directly. Irene clasped Emily's hands. "Because I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. A family, stability, an education, love. But did you love me?" "With all my heart, my child. That's why I did what I did." Richard sat in the chair beside the armchair. "Mrs. Irene, Emily and I have some questions about what happened. Are you feeling well enough to talk?" "Of course, you deserve to know everything." "How did you decide which baby to switch?" Irene sighed. "It wasn't a planned decision. I worked in the nursery and knew how eagerly you were waiting. Shirley always talked about how Mrs. Margaret dreamed of being a mother." "And then?" "When Emily was born and Sophie passed away, I was desperate. I knew I couldn't raise her alone. That's when I saw you at the hospital, overjoyed with the arrival of your daughter, and I had an impulsive idea. Didn't you think about the consequences?" "I did, but I thought it would be better for everyone. You'd have a healthy, beautiful daughter, and Emily would have a real family." Emily squeezed Irene's hands. "And my parents' biological daughter? How did she end up with the family from upstate?" "That was fate's doing," Irene said. A few hours after the switch, a desperate couple arrived at the hospital. The wife had given birth to a baby with severe health problems who didn't survive. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. "John and Rose Wilson," murmured Shirley. "Exactly," Irene confirmed. "They were inconsolable. When I saw their situation, I thought maybe I could help them too." "How so?" Richard asked. "Well, I knew there was a third baby in the nursery, a little girl who'd been abandoned by her parents. I suggested adoption to the couple." Richard frowned. "So there were 3 babies involved in this mess?" "Actually, there was no mess," Irene admitted. "Just 2 conscious decisions I made to help families in need." Emily was processing the information. "Mrs. Irene, are you saying Lauren, my parents' biological daughter, was actually an orphan?" "No," Irene said quickly. "Lauren really is your biological child. She went to the Wilson family. The third baby, the orphan, stayed at the orphanage." Richard was confused. "So there were really 2 swaps?" "Only one swap, Mr. Richard. Emily took the place of your biological daughter." Your biological daughter was adopted by the Wilson family. The third baby had nothing to do with you. Why did you do this to Lauren? Richard asked, his tone sharper. Irene lowered her head. Because I thought you'd be happy with Emily and wouldn't look for her, and the Wilson family needed a baby to ease their grief. But Lauren was our biological daughter, Richard insisted. She was. And I made a terrible mistake separating you. All these years, I've carried that guilt. Emily felt a pang in her chest. She realized she'd caused the separation between Richard and his true biological daughter. Mrs. Irene, do the Wilsons know Lauren isn't their biological child? They don't. I told them she'd been abandoned by a very young single mother. Richard stood up, agitated. Mrs. Irene, you destroyed 3 families with these decisions. Irene began crying harder. I know, Mr. Richard, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I just wanted everyone to be happy. Emily intervened. Dad, please. Mrs. Irene was trying to help everyone. By lying, by separating parents from their children. Mr. Richard, Shirley said, maybe we should leave for today. My sister is very upset. Richard looked at Irene, clearly distraught, and felt bad for being so harsh. I'm sorry, Mrs. Irene. I didn't mean to hurt you. You have every right to be angry with me, she said between sobs. I deserve it. Emily stood and hugged Irene. You don't deserve to suffer. What was done out of love. Thank you, my dear. You're exactly how I imagined you'd be, a person with a good heart. Mrs. Irene, can I come visit you again? I'd love that. You're the only real family I have. You have Mrs. Shirley. Shirley is my wonderful sister, but you're the daughter I never had. Richard moved closer to Irene again. Mrs. Irene, I'm sorry for being harsh. I'm processing a lot of information at once. I understand, Mr. Richard, and I want you to know Emily couldn't have had a better father. Thank you. When they left the retirement home, the trio sat in silence in the car for a while. Dad, are you okay? Emily asked. I'm trying to process everything. It's a lot to take in. What did you think of Mrs. Irene? She seems like a good person who made questionable choices for noble reasons. Shirley, who was driving, spoke up. My sister has always been like that. A heart too big for her own good. Shirley, did you know all these details? Richard asked. I did. That's why I carried so much guilt all these years. And now? What do we do about Lauren? Emily asked. Richard sighed. I think we need to try reaching out to her. She deserves to know the truth. What if she doesn't want anything to do with us? Then we respect her decision. How do we make first contact? Shirley suggested. I could try calling the school where she works. Say it's about a personal and important matter. No, Richard said. That might scare her. Let's try a gentler approach. What kind of approach? We could write a letter explaining who we are and let her decide if she wants to respond. Emily agreed. That's a good idea. That way she has time to think and won't feel pressured. But what if the letter doesn't reach her? Shirley, you said you know where she works. I do. At Anthony Smith Public School in Riverdale. Then we can send the letter to the school addressed directly to her. That night, Richard and Emily spent hours trying to write the letter. It was hard to explain such a complex situation in simple words. How would you start, Dad? I have no idea. Hello, you were switched at birth doesn't sound very delicate. What if we started by talking about ourselves, who we are, where we live? Good idea. After several attempts, they finally drafted a letter that felt appropriate. Dear Lauren, my name is Richard Sullivan, and this is my daughter Emily. We live in New York City and are writing because we recently discovered something that may be important to you as well. A few days ago, we learned that Emily was accidentally switched at birth. During our search, we found that you might be our biological daughter. We know this may sound very strange or even upsetting. It's not our intention to cause any trouble in your life or your family's. We'd simply like to know if you're interested in talking to us about this possibility. If you're not interested, we'll completely respect your decision and won't contact you again. If you'd like to know more, you can call us at 555-555-5555 or write to the address on the envelope. We hope you're well and happy with your family. With respect, Richard and Emily Sullivan. What do you think? Richard asked. I think it's good. Not invasive or too dramatic. Then let's send it tomorrow. The next morning they mailed the letter and waited anxiously. Shirley had explained that Riverdale was a small town, so the letter would arrive quickly. 3 days later, Richard's phone rang. It was an unknown number with an upstate New York area code. Hello? Mr. Richard? Said a woman's voice on the other end. Yes, speaking. This is Lauren. Lauren Wilson. You sent me a letter. Richard's heart raced. Lauren, thank you for calling. How are you? Confused, she said honestly. Very confused. I can imagine. Would you like to talk in person? I don't know. This is all so hard to believe. I understand completely. Would you like me to come to you, or would you prefer to come to New York City? I can't travel right now. I'm 7 months pregnant and my doctor advised against long trips. Then we can come to you. When would be a good time? Lauren hesitated. Mr. Richard, before we meet, I need to know, are you sure I'm your biological daughter? We have the information we've gathered, but we haven't done a DNA test yet. And if it's true, what do you want from me? Richard thought carefully before answering. Nothing, Lauren. We just want to meet you. You have your family and your life. We don't want to change any of that. And the girl you raised as your daughter, how does she feel about this? Emily is right here beside me. Would you like to talk to her? May I? Richard handed the phone to Emily. Hello, Lauren. Hi. This is so strange for me. For me too, Emily said warmly. But I want you to know, I don't hold any resentment toward you. Really? I kind of stole your family. You didn't steal anything. We were babies. And my father loves me as if I were his biological child. Are you happy together? We're very happy, and we want you to be happy too. Thank you for saying that. I was afraid you'd want to take me away from my family. We'd never do that. Your parents raised you with love. They're your real family. Then why do you want to meet me? Emily paused for a moment. Curiosity, I think, and maybe to be sure you're safe and happy. I am happy. I have a wonderful family. I'm married and expecting my first child. That's wonderful. We're so glad to hear that. Lauren, Emily said, would you like to meet us in person? I think so, but I want my parents there too. Of course. It'd be great to meet them as well. They're very nervous about all this. That's normal. It's new for everyone. Could you come next weekend? We can. Saturday or Sunday. Saturday would be better. We could meet at my house in the afternoon. Perfect. Could you give us the address? Lauren shared the address and they said goodbye. When Emily hung up, she and Richard hugged. How do you feel? Richard asked. Nervous but excited. And you? The same. Dad, are you ready to meet your biological daughter? Richard smiled. As long as you're by my side, I'm ready for anything. The following Saturday, Richard, Emily, and Mrs. Shirley made the 3-hour trip to Riverdale. It was a small, quiet town with tree-lined streets and simple but well-kept houses. The address Lauren had given led them to a modest home in a residential neighborhood. There was a small garden out front and a porch with potted plants. I'm nervous, Emily admitted. Me too, Richard said. Let's go, Mrs. Shirley encouraged. Better to get this over with. They rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with brown hair and kind eyes. You must be Richard and Emily, she said. I'm Rose, Lauren's mother. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Rose, Richard said, extending his hand. Please come in. Lauren and John are waiting in the living room. They stepped inside and were led to a simple but cozy room. A man in his 50s sat in an armchair, and on the sofa was a pregnant young woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. Richard's heart clenched when he saw Lauren. There was something familiar about her, something that reminded him of Margaret in her youth. Lauren, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Richard, she replied, standing up with difficulty because of her belly. Richard approached and, on impulse, hugged her. Lauren returned the embrace, and both began to cry. "Dad?" said Emily, stepping closer. Lauren pulled away from Richard and looked at Emily. "You must be Emily." "I am. And you're Lauren." The two women hugged as well, with no tension or competition between them, just two women sharing an unusual connection. John, Lauren's adoptive father, stood up and greeted Richard. "Nice to meet you, Richard. Sorry if I seem a little tense. This situation is new for us." "I understand, John. It's new for us too." Rose served coffee and cookies and everyone sat down to talk. "Lauren," Richard said, "first I want you to know we didn't come here to cause trouble or try to take you away from your family." "I know. Emily already explained that over the phone." "Well then, tell us about your life." Lauren smiled. "It's been wonderful. My parents always loved me deeply and gave me everything I needed. I studied, got my degree in education, met my husband in college, and now we're expecting our first child." "And did you know she was adopted?" Emily asked Rose and John. Rose and John exchanged glances. "No," Rose admitted. "The nurse at the hospital told us she'd been abandoned by a very young single mother." "You never suspected anything?" "No." "Why?" Richard showed a photo of Margaret when she was young. Lauren looked almost identical to her birth mother. "My goodness," Rose murmured. "The resemblance is striking." "And it's not just physical," Richard said. "You have some mannerisms just like Margaret's." Lauren was moved. "What was she like?" "My birth mother. Margaret was a wonderful person, kind, affectionate, devoted to her family. She would have loved you immensely." "Why couldn't she raise me?" "Because you were switched at birth. Margaret didn't even know she'd lost you until Emily was 8. And when she found out, she decided not to interfere because she didn't want to break apart the families that had already formed. Even knowing I was out there somewhere. She did some quiet searching and found out you were safe and loved. That was enough for her." Lauren began to cry. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have wanted to meet you too," Emily said. "But I'm sure she'd be happy knowing you had such wonderful parents like Mrs. Rose and John." Rose was crying too. "We always wanted a child. When our first biological daughter was stillborn, we thought we'd never have a family. Lauren was a gift from God to us." "And she still is," Richard said. "You're her real parents. We're just curious visitors." John spoke up. "Richard, would you like to do a DNA test for scientific certainty?" "If Lauren wants to, we're willing." "I do," Lauren said. "I need to know for sure." "We can arrange that without any trouble," Emily said. Rose poured more coffee and the conversation continued for hours. Lauren shared stories about her childhood, her education, her marriage, and her plans for the future. Richard and Emily told stories about Margaret and how they discovered the truth. "Lauren," Richard said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Did you ever feel like something was missing? Like there was a gap in your life?" Lauren thought for a moment. "Sometimes, as a child, I'd dream about a different family, but I thought that was normal. All kids imagine things like that, don't they?" "Maybe it was an unconscious connection," Emily suggested. "Could be." John looked at Richard. "And you? Do you feel like you've gained a daughter or lost one?" Richard answered, "I feel like I've met a special person who shares my DNA but already has her own family. I can't say I've gained a daughter because you already have wonderful parents, but I can say I feel complete knowing she exists and is doing well," he added. Shirley, who had been quiet most of the time, finally spoke up. "Lauren, I want to apologize for being part of all this confusion." "Mrs. Shirley, you don't need to apologize. If it weren't for you and your sister, I might have grown up in an orphanage. Even so, it should have been different. But it wasn't, and that's okay." Rose looked at Emily. "Emily, how do you feel knowing there's a biological child of your parents?" "At first I was afraid of being replaced, but now I understand love has no limits. My dad can love me and care for Lauren at the same time." "And you don't feel jealous?" "No, Lauren has her own life and family. She isn't trying to take my place." Lauren smiled at Emily. "I'd never try. You're the daughter he raised and loved his whole life. I'm just a reunion. We're sisters in a different way," said Emily. "I like that idea." By late afternoon, they said goodbye with a promise to stay in touch. Lauren and Emily exchanged phone numbers and decided they'd talk regularly. "Richard," said John at the farewell, "thank you for coming with so much respect and kindness. Thank you for raising such a special daughter. She's always been special. Now we understand where that comes from." On the drive back, Richard, Emily and Shirley talked about the meeting. "What did you think of her?" asked Emily. "I thought she was wonderful. Rose and John did an incredible job raising her." "And now how do you feel? Relieved?" "I always wondered what my biological daughter would be like. Now I know she grew up with love and is happy." "Dad, would you have wanted to raise Lauren?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "It's impossible to answer, Emily. If I'd raised Lauren, I wouldn't have raised you, and I can't imagine my life without you. Even knowing she's your blood daughter. Emily, you're my daughter in my heart, and the heart matters more than blood. Thank you for saying that, Dad. It's the truth." Shirley, who was driving, smiled. "You two remind me why I've loved working for this family for so many years." "Shirley," said Richard, "thank you for helping us uncover the whole truth. Thank you for forgiving me for keeping secrets." A week later, the DNA test results arrived. They confirmed Lauren was indeed Richard and Margaret's biological daughter. Richard called Lauren to share the news. "So it's true," she said. "It's true. How do you feel knowing this scientifically? I'm grateful to know you exist and are well. Richard, can I call you Dad, Richard?" Richard's heart swelled with emotion. "Of course you can. And can Emily call me sister? She'll be so happy to hear that." After hanging up, Richard told Emily about the conversation. "She wants to call me sister," said Emily, moved. "And you? How do you feel being someone's sister when you barely know them?" "I feel special. It's like our family has grown." In the following weeks, Emily and Lauren talked regularly on the phone. They exchanged photos, shared updates about their days, and developed a genuine friendship. When Lauren's baby was born, a boy named Peter, Emily and Richard visited them at the hospital. "He's beautiful," said Emily, cradling the baby. "You know what?" said Lauren. "When I look at him, I can see traces of Dad, Richard." Richard stepped closer and looked at his grandson. "There really is something familiar about him. Dad, Richard, would you like to be Peter's grandfather?" Richard was moved. "It would be an honor." "Then Peter will have two grandpas, Grandpa John and Grandpa Richard." Emily smiled. "And an Aunt Emily." "Exactly." 6 months after their first meeting, the two families gathered for Peter's baptism. Richard and Emily traveled to Riverdale, this time accompanied by some close friends. During the ceremony, Richard felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. His family had grown larger and more complex, but also richer in love. "Dad," Emily whispered during the Mass, "thank you for loving me even when you didn't know if I was your biological daughter. Thank you for loving me even though I was adopted. Now we're a complete family. We always were, Emily, we just didn't know." After the baptism, they visited Mrs. Irene at the retirement home. Her health had improved slightly since learning that her decision had led to happy families. "Mrs. Irene," said Lauren, holding Peter in her arms, "I want you to meet your great-nephew." Irene cried when she saw the baby. "He's perfect. And all of this was only possible because of you," said Emily. "Do you forgive me for all the complications I caused?" "There's nothing to forgive," said Richard. "You brought together families that were meant to find each other. Even though I separated you at first, fate found a way to reunite us in the end." Shirley, who was present, hugged her sister. "Did you hear that, Irene? You made families happy. I can finally die in peace." "No talk of dying," said Emily. "You need to see Peter grow up." Irene smiled. "I'll try." A year later, Richard decided to do something special. He hired an architect to renovate the house where he and Emily lived, adding extra space for when Lauren and her family came to visit. "Why are you doing this, Dad?" "Because I want everyone to feel at home here." "Do you really consider Lauren part of the family?" "I do. Not in the same way as you, who are my daughter in my heart, but as a special person who's part of our story. What if one day she wants to live here in New York City? We'll see." but I think she's happy where she is. In truth, Lauren had mentioned a few times the possibility of moving to a bigger city to give her son more opportunities. Richard had quietly been exploring job options for her and her husband in New York City. During a phone call, Lauren brought it up. "Dad, Richard, do you think I could find work as a teacher in New York City?" "I'm sure you could. Why do you ask?" "Michael and I are thinking of moving. We want Peter to have more educational opportunities in the future." "And your parents? How do they feel about it?" "They understand. In fact, Mom Rose said it would be good for Peter to get to know his extended family better. If you decide to move, we'll be here to help however we can." "Thank you, Dad, Richard." 3 months later, Lauren, Michael, and Peter moved to New York City. Richard helped Michael get a job at an auto repair shop, and Lauren started working at a school near Richard and Emily's home. "I can't believe we live in the same city now," said Emily, helping Lauren unpack in their new home. "Me neither. It's like a dream. Peter will grow up knowing both sides of his family." "Exactly. And you'll be the most present aunt he could ever have." Richard was overjoyed. For the first time in his life, he felt his family was complete. It wasn't the traditional family he'd imagined as a young man, but it was perfect, just the way it was. A few weeks after the move, Shirley retired. At her farewell party, she gave an emotional speech. "For 30 years, I've had the privilege of working for the most special family I've ever known. I watched Richard become a wonderful father, Emily grow into an incredible woman, and now I see the family grow with Lauren and Peter, Mrs. "Shirley," said Richard, "you've always been more than a secretary to us. It was family, and it will continue to be." "Of course it will." That evening, Richard, Emily, Lauren, Michael, and Peter had dinner together for the first time as a reunited family. "Dad," said Emily, "do you remember when all this began? When I fainted in the living room and you saw the scars?" "I do. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. Did you ever imagine we'd uncover so much?" "Never, but I'm grateful we did." Lauren, who was feeding Peter his bottle, smiled. "Do you know what the most amazing part of all this is?" "What?" asked Richard and Emily together. "That Peter will grow up with the most incredible story to tell. He has 2 grandfathers, a sister aunt, and a family formed through twists of fate." "And magic scars," added Emily, showing the marks on her arms. "Scars that saved our family," said Richard. Michael, the quietest of the group, finally spoke up. "Do you know what I find most beautiful in all this?" "What?" asked Richard. "That no one cared about blood or biology. Everyone cared only about love." "It's true," agreed Lauren. "My parents weren't jealous when they found out about you. You didn't resent me for being raised by another family, and Emily wasn't afraid of being replaced." "Because real love doesn't compete," said Emily. "It multiplies." Richard looked around the table and felt deep gratitude. His family had formed unconventionally, through mix-ups, secrets, and revelations, but the result was more beautiful than any traditional family could be. "Emily," he said, "thank you for fainting that day and showing your scars." Everyone laughed. "You're welcome, Dad. Thank you for saving me in the park when we were kids. Thank you for accepting me as your daughter even after learning the whole truth. Thank you for loving me before you even knew if I was your biological child." Lauren was moved listening to the conversation. "And thank you for welcoming me into the family without trying to take me away from my parents." "Thank you for giving me a beautiful grandson," said Richard, looking at Peter. "And thank you for making me feel whole," said Lauren. Shirley, who had been invited to dinner, raised her glass. "A toast to the Sullivan-Wilson family, the most special and unconventional family I know." Everyone clinked glasses and laughed together. 2 years later, Richard decided to turn their experience into something positive for others. He created a foundation to help families going through similar situations of adoption, mix-ups, or late discoveries about parenthood. "Why did you decide to do this, Dad?" asked Emily. "Because if our experience can help other families reunite with love instead of resentment, it's worth sharing." The foundation was called Heart Scars and offered psychological counseling, DNA testing assistance, and mediation for families in complex situations. Mrs. Irene, despite her declining health, volunteered to share her testimony with the foundation, recounting her experience and guiding others who had made similar decisions. "Mrs. Irene," said Emily during a visit, "you saved our family. You saved your own family, dear. I just planted the seed. A seed that blossomed into something beautiful. I hope other families can blossom too." The foundation grew quickly. Richard discovered many families were going through similar situations, and their experience was helping others reunite with love and understanding. Lauren also got involved, using her background as an educator to work with children discovering their origins. "It's incredible how our story has turned into something bigger," she said during a foundation meeting. "Everything we've been through has gained a purpose," Richard agreed. One day, a woman around 70 years old came to the foundation. She said she had given a child up for adoption 50 years ago and wanted to find him. Richard and Emily met with her personally. "Mrs. Teresa," Richard said, "tell us your story." "I was 17 when I got pregnant. My family forced me to give the child up for adoption. All these years, I've regretted that decision." "And now you want to find your son?" "I want to know if he's okay, if he was happy, if I can meet him." Emily stepped closer. "Mrs. Teresa, our experience has taught us that the most important thing is to approach these situations with love and no expectations." "What do you mean?" "If we manage to locate your son, he might not want to meet you. And that's okay. What matters is that he knows he was loved from the moment he was born. Do you think you can help me?" "We'll try," Richard said. 3 months later, they found Mrs. Teresa's son. His name was Andrew, and he was a doctor in Washington, D.C. When Richard first contacted him, Andrew was very interested in meeting his birth mother. The reunion between Mrs. Teresa and Andrew was emotional. He held no resentment and understood the circumstances that led to the adoption. "Thank you for helping me find my mother," Andrew told Richard and Emily. "It was a privilege to help," Richard replied. "Do you do this for every family that comes to the foundation?" "We try. It doesn't always work out, but we try." "Why do you do it?" Emily answered. "Because we've learned that family is so much more than biology. It's love, understanding, and acceptance." The Heart Scars Foundation became a national reference in family mediation. Richard, who had started it all by accidentally discovering Emily's scars, now helped dozens of families every month. During a television interview, Richard was asked what the greatest lesson from this experience had been. "The greatest lesson was that true love has no limits or conditions. Emily has always been my daughter, regardless of any DNA test. Lauren became special to me not because we share genes, but because she's a wonderful person who's part of our story." "And the scars? What do they mean to you now?" "The scars that once frightened me have become symbols of our connection. They show that sometimes pain can lead to beautiful discoveries." Emily, who was present for the interview, added, "Our family was formed through pain, but it grew through love, and now we help other families turn their pain into connection too." At the end of the interview, the host asked if there was anything else they'd like to say. "Yes," Richard said. "We'd like to tell everyone going through similar situations. Don't be afraid of the truth. The truth, when faced with love, always sets you free." Emily finished. "And remember, family isn't defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to strengthen every day." 3 years after its founding, the Heart Scars Foundation had helped over 500 families reunite. Richard had left his construction company to dedicate himself fully to the project. "Dad," Emily said one afternoon, "do you regret leaving the company to run the foundation?" "Never," Richard answered without hesitation. "The company gave me money. The foundation gives me purpose." "What about you, Aunt Emily?" asked Peter, now 4 years old and full of questions. "Do you like working with Uncle Richard?" "I love it, Peter. Helping families find each other is the most beautiful job in the world." "Why?" "Because it's like planting flowers in gardens that were once sad." Peter thought for a moment. "And Grandpa Richard and Aunt Emily's scars, are they flowers too?" Emily smiled. "Yes, Peter, yes. They're very special flowers that helped us find our family. I want special scars too." "You don't need them, sweetheart," said Lauren, hugging her son. "You were born into a complete family." Richard watched the scene, his daughter by heart, talking to his grandson about magical scars, and felt his life had become far richer than he'd ever imagined. That night, Mrs. Irene passed away in her sleep at the retirement home. Shirley called to share the news, and the whole family gathered for the wake. "She died knowing she did the right thing," said Shirley, crying. "And knowing she was loved by all the families she helped bring together," Richard added. During the funeral, Richard gave a speech. "Mrs. Irene made tough choices out of love. Maybe they weren't conventional, but they came from a pure heart. Thanks to her, our family came together in a unique and special way. She taught us that sometimes we have to break rules to follow our hearts," said Emily. "And that true love always finds a way to bring the right people together," Lauren finished. After the funeral, they returned home and sat in the living room where it had all begun 3 years earlier. "Dad," Emily said, "do you remember exactly what you were thinking when you first saw my scars?" "I do. I thought my whole life had been a lie. And now? Now I know my whole life was preparing me for this moment, for this family." Peter, who had been playing on the floor, stood up and showed a drawing he'd made. "Look what I drew." It was a picture of several people holding hands with colorful hearts around them. "Who are these people, Peter?" Lauren asked. "It's our family," he said proudly. "Grandpa Richard, Aunt Emily, Mommy, Daddy, me, Grandma Rose, Grandpa John, Grandma Shirley, and Grandma Irene in heaven." Richard took the drawing and looked at it tenderly. "It's the most beautiful family I've ever seen," he said, tears in his eyes. "And it's ours," Emily said, hugging her father. "Forever," Lauren added, joining the embrace. The end, dear listeners. Now tell us, what did you think of this story about family and destiny's scars? Leave a comment sharing which moment touched your heart the most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.